getting his hands on some anti-seizure medication for his kid. So that's a very reasonable question. We'll be back with that answer and a lot more straight ahead here on the Alex Jones Show. We'll be right back with more emergency medicine information. Don't go away.
We're on the march.
We've got all kinds of news today on Infowars.com. Be sure to check out that website. We've got stories like this one, Government Resurrects Plan to Monitor All Phone Calls and Emails. That's by Steve Watson. Got other news coming in. U.S. General Dempsey says Iran is a rational actor, not after nukes. Of course, lots of politicians are trying to make the case that Iran is trying to create nukes. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But shouldn't we at least have some evidence of it first before we start dropping bombs and killing ultimately millions of people? Signs of Iran activity in Yemen. A U.S. envoy says, that's in the Jerusalem Post. We've got the Silencing the Critics article by Paul Craig Roberts that we covered at the top of this show. Just reading you some of the headlines before we get back to Dr. Marks here. Egypt leads fight against NGO agitators. That's by Tony Cartolucci at Infowars.com. And then Obama nears his nuclear moment. This is a Financial Times article. Now, so much going on. Check out Infowars.com for the latest headlines or Prisonplanet.com as well. Getting back to Dr. Sheldon Marks, the question before the break was from a gentleman who's got an epileptic child and is wondering what he can do in a collapse scenario to keep his child, to prevent his child from having seizures. What's your take on that, Dr. Marks?
Well, first of all, let me just say I know absolutely nothing about epilepsy and the medications, and so I'm commenting basically on just some general concepts, and then I just went on during the break and and tried to find it. There's very little on when you Google it to try to find answers to that. One thing that I do tell people is, since we don't know what tomorrow holds, whether it's a gas crisis or a pharmacy shutdown or anything, if you're on any medications or any members of the family, especially important medications, and everyone's stable and happy, you should have at least 2 to 3 months worth of that medication available, and then use the old stuff first as you restock it. So
absolutely,
whether it's thyroid medicine, heart medicine, whatever you're taking, when the crisis occurs is not the time to run to CVS or Walgreens or Walmart and get in line and think that you're going to get your 3-month stash. So
it's also not the time to try to quit the medication cold turkey. I'm sure you would agree with that. I mean, we want to get off medications when we can safely ahead of time.
Absolutely right. Yeah, you do not want to start mixing around with that, because at a time when you need to be able to be focused and concentrate on what's going on is not the time to start having a lot of health issues. As far as the epilepsy goes, I'm going to defer to you on that, but the only thing I can find is something called Mornida citrifolia, and that was just somebody responded to a Depakote blog. And so probably the thing to do is to seek out a healthcare professional who's familiar with alternatives to Depakote and find out what's available. But I would be very cautious, because I do know that when you start to mess with medications, you can change the seizure threshold. And I'd hate for that kid to have problems while you're trying to transition if you're doing it on your own. So never do that kind of stuff with serious medications on your own, because you don't know over what time frame. Some medications you can stop at cold turkey and start something else up. Other medications may require weeks or even months of transitioning off to prevent any problems.
And I would say this is just another example of why it's good to get off as many meds as you can, because, who knows what the real cause behind that epilepsy. Seizures can be promoted in part by dietary sources, aspartame, excitotoxins. Some of the chemical adjuvants in some vaccines have caused seizures in many children. It's one of the main side effects of vaccines. There are, lots of sources where you can pick up bad chemicals, pesticides, for example, that can lead to that. So sorry to the caller, we can't answer his question directly, but he's going to have to do some more research.
That's a tough one. Let's talk about for a second real quick vaccinations, because I know we kind of differ on that a little bit, and that kind of makes for fun. I know there's a lot of controversy, and I don't know the answer, but there are some vaccinations that you might disagree that I think are pretty important to people to consider, especially in the scenarios that your listeners are aware of. And one of them, for example, is tetanus. You want to make sure you're up to date on that. That's not the time to step on a rusty nail and end up sick and dying because you didn't want to get your tetanus update,
Yeah, or maybe cholera, huh?
Yeah, cholera is also, but cholera is a little bit trickier because you have to keep updating that. Hepatitis. one of the big things that happens in after disasters is people get a lot of hepatitis. So there's a hepatitis vaccine out there that is, I'm not aware of any horrible side effects, but then again, I've not really looked at that a lot.
You know, the thing is, there's one school of thought is that there is such a thing as a safe vaccine if they had a one-shot vaccine, let's say hepatitis C, that's a one-shot or a two-stage vaccine that did not have the chemical adjuvants in it, and it did not have the thimerosal in it because it was being one vial shared by 10 different people, so they don't need the preservative. You know, if you could have it without the thimerosal and without the aluminum and without the polysorbate 80 and without the formaldehyde, arguably that could be arguably could be an understandably safe vaccine. But
right. But at the same time, and this goes with everything, whether it's aspirin or Pepto-Bismol or even the natural supplements, everybody is different. Everyone responds differently to everything that you put in your body. And so you have to know what you're doing and weigh the benefits and the risks.
Well, yeah, and the problem, Dr. Marks, is that they're slamming these little kids with 9 vaccines all at once that have the mercury in them, that have the aluminum in them, that have the adjuvants in them, and some of them just go into comas, some of them just die.
And you know, I was talking to people trying to understand, and I think, and again, this is something I know nothing about. It's not my field of expertise, but people who are involved in the vaccines and talking about the Dan doctors and the autism are saying the vaccines individually are not the issue. It's when they're combined, when the little baby gets 400 vaccines in one shot, combined with Tylenol, overloads the system. So again, the vaccines, I'm worried about them as well, but on the other hand, measles is coming back, and some of these diseases are horrible, and they're devastating, and they're life-destroying. So before you say blanket no to vaccines, you need to look at each one and think about what it is you're saying no to, and look at the risks, because whooping cough is coming back. Like I said, measles is back. Polio is still around. You know, there's not in the U.S.
Those things don't concern me, Dr. Marks. I mean, measles, no big deal. Even this aggressive TB. Get some good vitamin D going. Get your.
Speaking of vitamin D, for those, I've got my whole stash right here.
Awesome! Wow, you have actually a box of vitamin D.
I have a box of them. I go through them. Yeah, so I take my vitamin Ds.
Yeah, I'm not worried about polio. I'm not worried. You know, a lot of this. I know you didn't want to get into necessarily a vaccine debate, but some of this is just about hygiene and having clean sewer systems.
Right now you've moved to the smartest thing. The best thing you can do if you're concerned about your health now. If bad things happen, if you're out camping, if it's end of the world, whatever, is, believe it or not, the easiest thing, again, we're not about excitement, is just washing your hands.
Right.
It's washing your hands before you prepare food, washing your hands after you go to the bathroom, washing the kitchen utensils, washing the preparation space. I mean, if you just wash your hands, then you dramatically reduce by at least half the number of people that get horrible intestinal things like the cholera. Because 1.5 million kids still die every year in the world from diarrhea, again, an exciting subject, from just simple hygiene issues.
You're just full of exciting subjects for us today, Dr. Marks.
I'm kind of, if it involves the pelvic area, then that's kind of my world, I guess.
You're like the sober up doctor, like everybody else is talking about. Get yourself a bunker and get some smoke grenades, and you're like, get a colonoscopy and check your teeth.
Right, I know. Well, you know, yeah.
No, but you're the guy who's going to save lives, you know. You're the guy who's really, I mean, this is important.
It's the hand washing, and people forget that because it's not the exciting thing. It's not the drama thing. Something really simple that everyone really should do is take a CPR first aid course.
Good.
But not just yourself, because if you're the guy lying there with the chest pain, make sure your wife, make sure your teenage kids know what to do. Make sure even little kids know to call 911 as long as we have that. Make sure, you know, your neighbors are really your strongest suit. I mean, so you want to buy things and do all this cool stuff, but truly the strength of survival comes with a like-minded group of people. So your neighbors, your friends, people at church, at school, at work, you should all do a CPR first aid class there. You should talk about who's got what skills and who knows what things. Maybe someone was a dental assistant for 10 years before they did something else. Maybe it turns out there's a paramedic who lives right behind you that you don't know about. So you want to, that's a smart thing to do that most people don't do because they're so caught up, you know, stockpiling things.
Good advice. We're going to get to a caller here in a second, but I've got one more question for you, Dr. Marks. A lot of people in the prepper community, they keep asking me, how do they get legitimate medication painkillers for emergency use only? And of course, lots of red flags go off. Painkillers, you know, Whitney Houston, everything. But is there any legitimate legal way to get something that might work in a total breakdown scenario that, you know, as a medication painkiller, something beyond, you know, aspirin and Tylenol?
Right. Well, if you're going to, anything that's controlled, narcotics, unfortunately has a very thick paper trail with it. So if I write for a prescription for narcotics, I have to include my federal numbers, and they monitor those prescriptions, and I have to have appropriate documentation in a medical record as to why that gentleman got his 4 Tylenol with codeines or Lortabs or Percodans. However, I was just reading a book that listed the pain blocking qualities of all medications, and I was surprised to see that an 800 milligram ibuprofen, with all the potential side effects that I'm sure you'll tell about, but an 800 milligram ibuprofen is far and away more powerful than almost all the other medications.
Really?
What narcotics do is they really don't make the pain go away. They simply dull you to where you don't care about it. Whereas the anti-inflammatories like ibuprofen, what they do is they actually block the chemicals that stimulate the nerves that then your brain interprets as pain.
But what about getting something quickly where you got a buddy that's just been injured, you know, he's bleeding, he's screaming. How do you help your buddy?
Well, in the military world, they would give them these fentanyl lollipops. It's a very powerful narcotic. They would suck on it. But and I've been involved with a lot of that kind of training, what we're basically told and understand is they're not going to remember the horrible, excruciating pain they're going through. You are, and it may be upsetting to you, so you have to focus on what you have to do. So whether it's applying tourniquets or using combat gauze to stop bleeding or whatever you have to do, that has to be first. The pain really is more... It's a tough one because you really aren't going to have narcotics. And if you have narcotics in your possession and you don't have a prescription for it, then I think there's all kinds of felonies you've committed, and then bad people start, you know.
And if you have narcotics, you can bet that some looters are going to want to get that supply from you. Right.
Absolutely. So, yeah, you don't want to put a sign out. I guess you could call up Whitney Houston's estate and get stuff from her.
You want to have like a big pharmacy sign on your door.
Right. Yeah, I guess any major movie star or musician will have a good stash of that stuff.
And how sad is it that Whitney Houston was killed by FDA-approved pharmaceuticals, just like Heath Ledger, just like Elvis Presley? In fact, you know what? Bruce Lee was killed by brain swelling, allergic reaction to a medication as well. We're going to actually do a story on that. But, I mean, I know they have their role in medicine. I'm not
the problem is that it's the doctor when someone comes in and has a problem, we want to make them better. And everybody functions from their own direction. So the standard, if you come to me and you've got a bladder infection, I'm going to want to treat you with what's in my arsenal of treatments. And someone's going to come to different people and get different things. The problem is a lot of these people know how to play the game. And so they'll go to one doctor and get Xanax. The doctor will be conservative and say, I'm only going to give you 10 of these. Then they'll go to another doctor for back pain. Well, I'm going to give you some narcotics, but I'm not going to give you too many. And by the end of the week, they've seen 4 or 5 different doctors who, not knowing that the other doctors exist, loaded these people up with large stashes. We saw one lady once when I was riding with a paramedic out here, and 5 different doctors had given her narcotics, and she was calling the paramedics because she was severely constipated and wanted help, which is, again, we're back down to the pelvic area. But the point is, none of these doctors realized that the other doctors were prescribing these narcotics, which have a constipation as a side effect. So that's a classic example of what happens. And these celebrities have the clout to be able to make a phone call, have a doctor come to them, get in to see somebody. Celebrities and wealthy, super wealthy tend to surround